It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Lessons must be acted upon. A damning report points to systemic mental health care failings that allowed the Nottingham attacker to kill.
I think sometimes the way these services are funded, it's almost like these deaths are collateral damage to a poorly run and poorly funded system.
Also tonight, Ukraine tells Putin only peace will stop its offensive as Zelensky's forces continue their push into Russia. As diplomatic efforts continue in the Middle East, in Gaza, a stark reminder of the human cost of the conflict. Hopes of respite for the firefighters battling the aftermath of wildfires in the suburbs of Athens. Plus, Banksy's summer tour takes the animals to the zoo. But is it a breakout or a break-in? And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. The Health Secretary says lessons must be learnt and acted upon after the deaths of 3 people brutally stabbed in Nottingham last summer. A damning report has pointed to a series of failures and misjudgments in the treatment of their killer, Valdo Calacane, who has paranoid schizophrenia. His victims' families say the NHS and police have blood on their hands and are calling for more accountability, because the deaths of Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates are not isolated, forming part of a wider history of similar failings. Our communities correspondent, Becky Johnson, reports.
CCTV cameras caught Valdo Calacane walking through the deserted nighttime streets of Nottingham. What they can't show are voices inside the paranoid schizophrenic's head. The same voices that just hours later drove him to kill 3 people. Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and Ian Coates were all stabbed to death in the attack last year. A damning report has pointed to a series of failures by professionals to prevent their deaths. The victims' families say the NHS and police have blood on their hands.
The risk assessments in his case were really poor by treating consultants, and he was sectioned 4 times. There were 4 opportunities to change his medication, change it to depot medication, which is injectable, which means that the patient complies.
Ultimately, statistics show that if there's a decent, or at least even a basic standard of delivery of care, homicide does not occur.
Calacane wasn't engaging with his care or taking his medication. There were so many warnings not heeded.
NHS has already instructed trusts not to discharge patients who don't attend, which is what happened tragically in Valdo Calacane's case. And there will be further action, and I'll be seeking regular updates, because we've heard so many times before, lessons must be learned. Actually, what we need to see is lessons acted upon.
The families want more answers and accountability. The NHS Trust in Nottinghamshire said it accepted the report's conclusions and has improved processes. But these deaths weren't isolated, instead part of wider systemic failings. On average, in Britain, over 100 people a year are killed by someone with mental illness.
There's Jacob.
Jacob Billington was stabbed to death by a paranoid schizophrenic on a night out in Birmingham in 2020. His best friend, Michael Callaghan, was also stabbed in the neck, causing a stroke. He's been left permanently disabled.
It severed my artery and vein.
The criticism of services in Nottingham now is strikingly similar to serious concerns highlighted previously about the care of the man who attacked Michael and Jacob. He too was free to roam the streets despite refusing medication. He'd even told professionals he heard voices telling him to kill people.
It's unbelievable that, no one responsible for it, no, with any position of authority, has ever been named or had to justify those decisions. It's all been treated as though it's just an unfortunate act. They can't all be unfortunate along the way. Every single missed opportunity can't all bundle up into, it's just one unfortunate state of events. It's people neglecting their jobs. It makes me angry, to be honest.
Along with Michael, Jacob's mother had been fighting for failures to be exposed long before the Nottingham killings. She fears further deaths are inevitable.
It absolutely makes it worse in that you feel that not only have you lost your son in the most horrific of circumstances, But the lessons that were supposedly learnt from his death haven't been. I think sometimes the way these services are funded, it's almost like these deaths are collateral damage to a poorly run and poorly funded system.
The Nottingham families want a statutory public inquiry, and there are growing calls for a wider examination of a system that too often allows dangerous people to slip through the net. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Well, our health correspondent Ashish Joshi is with me now. And Ashish, the Health Secretary is saying that lessons must be learned. We hear that time and time again. We've heard that before, particularly after inquiries, and in this case, perhaps prior to an inquiry. What is different this time?
No one doubts the Health Secretary's sincerity and his willingness to bring about change. But to do that, you have to accept that the mental health service in this country isn't at breaking point. It is broken. It is in crisis and has been in crisis for a great many years. That is of no comfort to grieving families like the ones in Nottingham. But when you look at the statistics and you look at the data, patient homicides, as they're referred to, where somebody is killed by a mentally ill patient, the numbers are stark. There were 5 killings since 2020, and that is probably very low because of the pandemic and because everyone was staying indoors. The year before that, 2018, 2019, the NHS's own data showed there were 111 patient homicides. These are mentally ill patients who are killing other people, not harming themselves, not seriously injuring other people, and not taking their own lives. If you take all of those numbers together, that figure would be pretty grim. The reason for that is the mental health service is broken. There just isn't enough capacity in the system. There aren't enough trained clinicians to deal with the growing patient lists. And also because of the treatment of patients in community settings has changed, almost stopped altogether. If that had been continued, when you have patients like Calcoin, then you would have physicians, clinicians monitoring him, those red flags where he didn't attend for sessions, stopped taking his medications, stopped engaging with clinicians, that would have been flagged and that would have been addressed. And patients need medication. So the system isn't just allowing these mentally ill patients to kill other people, it's harming those patients too. So it's a double tragedy.
Bleak picture that you paint, and we shall see if the public inquiry goes ahead. Ashish, thank you. A week after Ukraine's surprise invasion of Russia's Kursk region, Ukrainian forces show no signs of being pushed back. The country's president this evening says his military now controls 74 separate settlements inside Russia. Volodymyr Zelensky says his troops are still making advances and only peace will make them stop. Our defence and security editor, Deborah Haynes, reports from Ukraine.
Russian prisoners of a war Ukraine has brought to their land. These captives are now on the Ukrainian side of the border. They're among hundreds of Russian forces thought to have been detained since Ukraine launched a shock incursion a week ago. The sign reads State Border of Ukraine. Entry is prohibited. Deserted now, but this is a crossing point into Russia. It was along this area that Ukrainian commanders launched their audacious assault. Most troops reportedly only learnt they'd be attacking Russia on the day before they went in. Adapting to the new reality, he congratulates the advance and shouts, "Glory to Ukraine." But this was never going to be an easy battle. Ukrainian tanks stopped in their tracks. The threat from Russian drones all too clear in this footage verified by Sky News. While initially taken by surprise, Moscow is fighting back. Vladimir Putin acknowledged the crisis when he met the Palestinian president to discuss a very different conflict.
Russia today, unfortunately, must defend its interests and defend its people with weapons in hand. But what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Palestine, of course, does not go unnoticed on our part.
For Ukraine, after 2.5 years of Russia's full-scale war, Kyiv's counter-offensive is a cause for hope.
Words don't help, so they don't understand words. Only weapon, only strength.
It's very important, but we don't know how. But we pray and believe in our victory.
The government here says it's not interested in permanently seizing a chunk of Russia, but it does want Russian attacks on its soil to stop and for Russian troops to leave its land. The big question, though, is whether this assault and whatever else Ukraine has in store will be enough to change the course of the war in Kyiv's favour.
Ukraine chose to take the gamble. It will be hoping it pays off. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
Well, let's get more on that now. Our defence analyst Michael Clark has been looking at the incursion and what it can tell us about both sides' strategy.
We're into the 8th day of this offensive now, and the Kursk pocket is still getting larger. It's about 1,000 square kilometres, and there's quite a lot of activity around the edges of the pocket in the other areas, the 3 oblasts, the 3 regions, Bryansk, Belgorod and Kursk itself. And now about 180,000 people, Russians, have been moved out of that area, which shows the effect that it's having even on the areas around it. So the Ukrainians are doing pretty well. They're pushing all the way around the fringes to the east of the pocket and to the northwest of the pocket. That's because the Russian border forces are too weak and inexperienced to be able to do very much about it. And up against good Ukrainian units, the Kremlin's been rather slow, indeed even reluctant, to draw forces from elsewhere in the whole battle area to deal with it. But the Ukrainian army now say that a small number of troops have been redeployed, Russian troops, from Kherson and from Zaporizhia. That those are not the troops they want to be redeployed. They want the troops from here to have to move. But so far, there is some movement in Russian troops. So the Battle of Kursk will take place. When that battle starts, I think it'll be pretty ferocious. The Ukrainians so far have had it all their own way. These are men of the 225th Battalion. This was a territorial unit 2 years ago. These were all civilians, but now they're a frontline combat unit. And there they are in one of the villages taking down Russian flags and replacing them with Ukrainian flags. So the Battle of Kursk will begin. When it begins, it'll be pretty ferocious. The Russians eventually will bring in bigger forces. And when that battle does begin, it will be measured in days and weeks, not in weeks and months.
To the Middle East now, and Hamas has this evening confirmed it will not join talks aimed at reaching a ceasefire in Gaza later this week. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts are continuing to try and limit the extent of a potential Iranian attack on Israel in retaliation for the assassination of Hamas leader in Tehran. Well, Sky special correspondent Alex Crawford is in Beirut for us. And Alex, where do we stand diplomatically tonight?
I mean, it's looking pretty messy tonight, it has to be said. I mean, earlier on today, let's look at what we were expecting. We were told and led to believe by several sources that there was going to be a multi-pronged, multinational, multi-country visited diplomatic approach to try to get these ceasefire talks back on the table. We were told and led to believe that US Secretary of State was going to go to Israel. Now we know he's not going. We were told that his US envoy, the president's US envoy, Amos Hochstein, was due in Beirut tonight to talk to Lebanese authorities tomorrow. They're acting as conduits with Hezbollah to try and impress on them the need for ceasefire, the need for restraint. Now, we can't get any confirmation from the Lebanese authorities about who he's going to see, who is going to meet him tomorrow. And even whether he's here, we'll have to wait and see tomorrow whether he does turn up. We know that Brett McGurk, the Middle East envoy for the US, is in Cairo, and we do know that the CIA chief is in Doha. We know that the Qatari officials are still expecting those ceasefire talks to happen on Thursday. But at the moment, the Hamas representative in Lebanon has told our Sky producer that they are not taking part in the negotiations. So a number of the key people are not taking part. Have a listen to what the Lebanese health minister told us earlier today, because he seems to echo what a lot of people, what a lot of the key players are feeling about the possibility of any progress in ceasefire talks.
It's clearly that this is not the acts of somebody whose intention is to calm things down. And therefore, I think that we are very worried from the intentions of what is happening by the Israeli government, and the fact that a lot of the international community seems to, in action at least, allowing this to continue.
So it's not looking at all positive whether those ceasefire talks will actually go ahead. What we do know, having spoken to sources in Tehran, and what we've heard from the Hezbollah leader and the Iranian Supreme Leader, is that they seem determined to retaliate. And according to one source in Tehran who told me just a few hours ago, it's not a question of if, but when, and it will be at the timing of their choosing. Now, that could be very much calibrated. It could still be just short of provoking all-out war, and I think that's what the diplomats are focused on now.
Alex, thank you. Well, while the diplomacy continues, in Gaza today, a stark reminder of the realities of the ongoing war. Newborn twins are amongst those killed in an airstrike as their father went to register their births. Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports now from Jerusalem. And a warning, it does contain content you might find distressing.
Mohammed became a father 4 days ago. Today he went to hospital in central Gaza to pick up the birth certificates of his newborn twins. Instead, he ended up in the morgue to identify the bodies of his wife and 2 babies. They were killed by an Israeli airstrike whilst he was out.
People from the neighborhood called me and told me that my house I live in was bombed. My wife, my 2 children, and my mother-in-law were gone. My wife gave birth the day before yesterday. I didn't even have the time to celebrate them. She gave birth by cesarean section, and she was still tired and couldn't walk.
The airstrike hit their top-floor apartment. We asked the IDF for a statement, but haven't received one. Inside, the house is still smouldering from the explosion. They use bottles of water to try and put out the fires still burning. Any sign of family life has already been extinguished. Reem will never know her parents. They were killed in another airstrike, leaving the 5-month-old an orphan. Her body is pockmarked with wounds from shrapnel. She is the only survivor from her family.
She's refused any kind of feeding. This is one of the very sad and catastrophic story we have ever seen in this war. A lot of these sad stories nowadays.
For now, Reem is in the arms of her aunt, but the doctors are desperately trying to find a surrogate mother to breastfeed her before she gets any weaker. Today, Hamas fired 2 rockets towards Tel Aviv, the first time that they've targeted the city in more than 2 months. The IDF said that one fell short inside Gaza, the other landed in the sea. There were no injuries. Hamas might be severely diminished, but they're not defeated, even after 10.5 months of brutal war. Israel believes that the best chance of a favourable ceasefire deal is to keep the military pressure on Gaza. It might be working, but it's coming at a huge cost to generations of Palestinian families. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
In Greece, thousands of people have been forced from their homes after a wildfire tore through the suburbs of Athens. The blaze started on Sunday near Lake Marathon, about 35 kilometres northeast of Athens, and spread across Mount Penteli, just north of the Greek capital. It reached areas in the capital's northern suburbs, which you can see here, stretching up towards the village of Grammatiko in the north, down towards Vrilicia, where authorities say 1 person was found dead. From there, our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins reports.
Sakis has lost everything.
Oh, wow. So this was the kitchen?
This is what's left of his home on the edge of Athens. A wreck charred and twisted by the heat of wildfires that ripped through here, destroying everything in their path. A huge flame appeared from behind and everything melted in a minute, he tells me. There was no time to even grab any clothes. All I have is what I'm wearing. This is what he was facing. The worst wildfire this year in Greece. The people here did what they could to stop the flames, but not everyone got out in time. The body of a woman was later found in a factory behind Sakis's house. She was a friend, a colleague, a good person, dignified and hard-working, Sakis says. It's a disgrace what happened, apart from our property, to lose a human life. In the hills of Barnaby, where the fire started, his anger is shared. Huge swathes of the area have been burned, homes and livelihoods lost. The fire started at around 3 o'clock on Sunday. By around 5, we had no water, this local councillor tells me. He says they saved their homes alone. As they try to rebuild, a few miles up the road, the deadly inferno seems a world away. Locals sunbathe as helicopters gather water to douse nearby flames. For many Greeks, summer wildfires have become the new normal. The loss and destruction seen here can no longer be blamed on one-off freak events. These fires are happening year after year. The lives of thousands of Greeks are being altered by climate change. The worst of the current blazes are under control, but hundreds of firefighters remain on high alert, aware soaring temperatures could bring fresh misery to Greece. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Athens.
The inquest into the death of former England and Surrey cricketer Graham Thorpe has been opened and adjourned. The inquest heard that Mr Thorpe died after being struck by a train on the 4th of August. His wife Amanda has previously said that the 55-year-old former cricketer, who was considered one of the finest batters of his generation, had taken his own life after suffering from major depression and anxiety. And if you've been affected by this story or are struggling, you can reach out to Samaritans on their helpline at 116 123 or via email joe@samaritans.org. Police have released a picture of the man who's been charged after an 11-year-old girl was stabbed in central London. 32-year-old Yohan Pintaro is charged with attempted murder and possession of a bladed article. The victim's mother was initially believed to have been injured, but police confirmed blood from her daughter was mistaken as her own injuries. A man who looted a series of shops during the unrest in Hull earlier this month has pleaded guilty to violent disorder, burglary and racially aggravated criminal damage. 25-year-old John Honey admitted stealing from Lush, Shoe Zone and an O2 store. His sentencing hearing was adjourned after claims he asked a probation officer if he wanted his autograph, as he is famous and all over social media. A day after his diving partner Tom Daley announced his retirement, Team GB Olympic medalist Noah Williams has told Sky News he's also considering stepping away from the sport after struggles with his mental health. He was speaking to Shimon Freeman-Powell.
From Paris to Paddington, fresh home from the Olympic Games with 2 shiny medals swinging around his neck, British diver Noah Williams took part in another set of games, playing sports with children at a local youth club in London.
I didn't really go into it thinking I'm going to become an Olympic medalist like some people do. So that's what I've been trying to tell some of the kids today, like just do it for fun. You never know what happens.
Winning bronze in the men's 10-metre platform and silver alongside teammate Tom Daley, Noah was among athletes who made the country proud, with many hoping for a repeat performance.
Do you think you will be at the next Olympic Games?
I honestly have no clue. It's a 50-50 at this point, really. I mean, I'm going to take a long break and see, but yeah, I think in terms of what's better for my mental health, we'll decide whether I carry on or not. And if in a year I don't miss diving and my mental health's better, I might just leave it there, because the reason I feel like I can leave it is because now I've got these 2 medals. I've achieved more than what I thought I would, and I'm so happy with how my career's gone.
Noah isn't the first to speak about the pressures that athletes face, both physically and mentally.
I think what we're beginning to understand, and through the bravery of the people who are actually telling their stories, is that mental health can be really fragile in elite athletes, given the circumstances under which they have to work, under which they train, they compete.
A reminder that even athletes at elite levels are still human.
Like one comment will make me feel so much worse and like really sad and it can ruin my whole week.
And after using his skills to win Olympic medals, he is now using his voice to promote social change.
I do have this chance and I want to make the most of that to, I guess, impact as many people as possible.
Siobhan Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Another day, another Banksy in London. The 9th artwork to appear in 9 days is a gorilla on the shutters at the entrance to London Zoo. The zoo left the shutter down today to make sure visitors got to enjoy the piece, but not everyone is convinced. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
Finally, it all makes sense, doesn't it? Popping up on the shutters of London Zoo, a Banksy breakout, or is it a break-in? Letting the cat out of the bag, so to speak, this gorilla who's seemingly been aiding the animals we've seen on an art trail which has swept through the city this August. From that first balancing goat to the 2 elephants touching trunks, swinging monkeys via a howling wolf, fish-eating pelicans, a big cat stretching, piranha police box, rampaging rhino, and now this.
Anatomically, I'm blown away by it.
London Zoo having to deploy extra security and rethink about how it opens up going forwards.
We don't want to raise the shutter because we don't want to damage any of the mural. We're good at protecting things. It's what we do. We protect wild animals, both here at the zoo, but critically also in their natural habitat.
Of course, you can never quite tell with an artist like Banksy, but this feels like it might just be the end of his animal run. Experts who have studied the Bristol street artist's other works, trying their best to figure out what we all want to know. What does it mean?
I think Banksy is an artist who thrives on ambiguity. But if there's one meaning that I would attach to this sequence of work, it's about sharing, it's about joy, and it's about a giving back to people at a time of real duress in the world, through animals and through sheer kind of exuberance.
Have the animals been making a break for freedom, or might they be returning to a place of safety?
Theorise all you like about what's going on here. The only thing we actually know, reportedly coming via Banksy's support organisation, Pest Control Office, is that it might not be that deep. Coming at a time when the news headlines are super bleak, they've said he apparently wants to cheer people up and engage with us in some creative play.
And he's certainly done that.
Just as we ran along, big crowd, thought the zoo's a bit popular. And then Laura said, "It's our Banksy."
It's wild to me that he was here maybe 12 hours ago.
It's pretty cool. I think it's pretty fitting.
But has Banksy now spawned a copycat? This, it would seem, is not the artist. Unclaimed by him, but also emerging overnight, sprayed onto the side of an exhibition space in Romford. There have been a few individuals over the last month recognising they can make a few quid by taking the free works away. While critics might say the street artist is overpriced and overrated, there are plenty who appear to have welcomed this summer distraction. See it while you can, draw from it what you will, because who knows how long it'll last or when Banksy will strike again. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Will there be any more pieces? That was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Daily Mail. Its headline, Starmer told to get a grip of work-shy Britain. We'll be right back with that story and others. Do stay with us. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Health Secretary says the deaths of the Nottingham attack victims could have been prevented after a report found there were multiple failures in the care given to Valdo Calacane. Ukraine has told Putin only peace will stop its offensive into Russian territory as Zelensky's forces continue their push into Kursk. Iran says only a ceasefire deal in Gaza will stop it from retaliating against Israel after Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the director of the Onward think tank, Sebastian Payne. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Metro leads with Iran insisting that only a ceasefire deal in Gaza will stop it from retaliating against Israel after Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran. The Daily Mirror reports that the Middle East is on the brink, with Brits possibly needing to evacuate from Israel as war fears grow. The Guardian reveals how the cost of living crisis hit budget food prices the worst. It also features a special report on violence against women, reporting that a woman dies at the hands of a man every 3 days in the UK. The Times reports that rail attacks on women are up by 50%, with a rise in both violent and sexual offences. The Mail says Labour is under pressure to tackle unemployment, with Starmer told to get a grip of work-shy Britain. The Telegraph reports on a 40% surge in children on disability benefits since the pandemic and warns of the lasting effects this could have on the economy. And the Star takes issue with portly gentlemen going topless in public. It's very sizist. A reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Sebastian Payne and Sonia Soda. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Mail front page. More than 9 million people don't have a job and they're not looking for one, a problem for Sir Keir Starmer. Sonia, take us into this.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting the Daily Mail have put this on this front page because it's actually not a news story. It's a big problem, a big legacy issue that the Labour government the new Labour government have been left by the last Conservative government. There are a number of kind of trends that underpin these very high rates of worklessness. But a serious issue is the state of the NHS. So you've got a lot of people out of work who have been out of work for a long time, which makes it difficult to find work again. When you look at the most common causes of it, it will be for people in their 20s, it will be things like mental health issues, mobility issues, musculoskeletal is a big issue, and it's very, very difficult to get NHS appointments for physiotherapy, for example, on the mental health side, very difficult to get access to talking therapies. So I think one of the big challenges for Labour is you've got to bring this number down. There's an absolute consensus about that. But you probably need to invest quite a bit of money in order to bring that rate down. And Labour have inherited a very, very tricky fiscal situation from the Conservatives. They are being very fiscally conservative themselves, and there's not a lot of cash around, and they don't want to borrow to invest. We don't know yet what taxes may or may not go up in the autumn budget. So there's not a lot of money to put into this solution. And, you know, they are saying they're going to reform job centres, etc. There is going to be more support for people from within current budgets. But I think experts would look at this and say, well, if you've got people who've been out of work for a long time, they can't access these really important NHS services, which are part of moving back people into work. That's very difficult.
The article, Sebastian, saying that it's a major headache for the Chancellor because employers can't find the staff that they need. So, therefore, how can you grow the economy?
Well, look, it's obviously not just an inheritance of the last government, it's an inheritance of the COVID pandemic, because before the pandemic, the people who were economically inactive was about 1 to 2 million. It rose to 5 million, stayed pretty consistent for years out that, and several work and pension secretaries from the Conservatives tried to tackle this with varying degrees of success. And this is something that Labour has said they want to get on top of. And yes, it includes investment in the NHS, but also it requires looking at the benefit system and universal credit, how that's interacting with the workforce as well, because that's something that's going to have to be looked at in terms of trying to make sure that those who can, are able and fit to work, are able to be within the jobs market. And there are questions about various skills gap and education, which, as Sonia alluded to, there's no easy fix to try and get to that. But ultimately, the fact is that this number is too high. It's not sustainable to have a system and a welfare system that is supporting that amount of people who are economically inactive, and that is going to have to be brought down. You know, I remember a figure that under the last government, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt used to say, if you could get 1 million of those 5 million economically inactive people back into the labour market, it would have cured our inflation crisis almost instantly, the nearest thing to a silver bullet. But unfortunately, you can't fix this with a silver bullet. And I think that what will be interesting when we come to that budget later in October is not only what happens with taxes when they go up, but also what's going to be about what reforms there are to welfare and what reforms there are to education, what reforms are there to skills, because the fact is this is going to take some political capital. It's not easy to resolve, and we know that Rachel Reeves has got that big majority, as Labour love to keep reminding us. The question is, how are they going to use it? And it's both the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph highlight in different ways on their front page that simply does need to be tackled.
Yes, and that moves us on to the Telegraph, Sonia. Related story, the 40% increase in children on disability benefits, and this... It's risen starkly following on from the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's important to say this is about disability living allowance, so it's a benefit that parents of disabled children get. It's not means tested, it's to help them care for their children's additional needs and access additional services. And the reason why it's gone up so starkly is it's because of an increase predominantly amongst boys of behavioural issues like ADHD and autism. And what experts think is that this increase in issues that boys are having is really related to the pandemic and the mental health issues that sort of being out of school for so long during lockdowns, learning at home may have triggered. And it seems from this kind of data, it's probably affecting boys and girls in different ways, but we know that boys often tend to react to adversity with more externalising behavioural issues, whereas with girls it can be kind of more internalising. So it's an issue, partly because it obviously costs the state more, but also because it shows that there's something going on with our children that probably is related to the pandemic. You know, we often talk about a well-being crisis which manifests itself very differently amongst boys and girls, but, you know, I don't think we know yet the long-term impact that the pandemic will have had on children, you know, young children, and this is probably one of the things we're seeing as a result of it. And it's like, you can't really, if there's a need there and children need to access this extra support, you can't really take it away. But it is just, it's one of the long-term issues, I think, that the pandemic will have created.
But it is a huge jump, Sebastian, isn't it? 730,000 under 18s now the subject of disability living allowance, up 40%, as we said. In November 2019, it was 534,000, so a huge jump. I mean, surely the question has to be asked, why?
Yes, and I think Sonia was completely right that there is the legacy of the COVID pandemic and of lockdowns here, and no one really wants to talk about it because everyone wants to memory hole the pandemic and all the lockdowns as much as possible, because it was not a happy time in anyone's life. But the fact is that they did have significant impacts on, I mean, every part, nearly all the problems we're seeing in society are some way have links back to the pandemic, be it the courts backlog, be it the NHS backlog, being it the backlog in prisons and the capacity there, and then, of course, being the mental health of many people, and not just children, particularly what we're seeing with young boys here. There is another element we should flag as well, of course, which is social media and what this does to younger men in particular, about how not only the algorithms are siloing people into very bad content, but it's one of these things that's not easy to resolve, but it is a growing problem. And this, again, is something that needs a health approach, it needs a schools approach, it needs a parental approach to deal with it as well. And it's interesting that we forget the COVID pandemic COVID inquiry, on the pandemic has been ticking along. We had the first report, which was a lot about procurement and PPE and all things that went wrong there. Not been so much about the impact of lockdown and how it's impacted on society. That will come later. And I think that even if people do want to forget about it, we should look at that, because all the experts say we will get another global pandemic at some point. And I think it's this kind of thing that needs to be taken into trade-offs when you're thinking about what measures you take to slow the spread of the disease. Let's move on, Sonia, to a couple of papers at least on violence against women. The Guardian, their investigation, woman dies at the hands of a man every 3 days in the UK. The Times reporting that rail attacks on women, attacks on the railways are up by 50%, painting a very, very depressing picture. What's going on? Yeah, well, it's a reminder of just how prevalent male violence against women and girls is in society, and it's a small minority of men who commit it, but it affects women very, very seriously across society. So The Guardian have got a special report which is done with the Femicide Census, which is an organisation that keeps track of the women who lose their lives at the hands of men each year, where there's a man charged with their death. And The Guardian, there's 50 so far this year. We know the Femicide Census has compiled this data over a number of years. We know on average a woman loses her life or a girl loses their life at the hands of a man once every 3 days. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of domestic abuse, a lot of violence against women and girls that sits underneath that. You know, I don't think it's an exaggeration to call it an epidemic in society. That's certainly how women's charities talk about it. Labour's actually got an incredibly ambitious target to cut violence against women and girls by a half. That's very, very challenging. And I think we need to see from the government exactly what that action plan is. It's exciting for a feminist like me that they're willing to commit to that, because, you know, I don't think we've ever seen a society reduce violence on that scale before. And it's certainly an area that Keir Starmer knows a lot about, being a former DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions. But, you know, it's going to take a lot to reduce it. But it is preventable. This is a key thing. I've read some of the stories of these women, and you know, a common strain in a lot of these stories is men who start off with lower level abuse, lower level violence. These women know they're at risk. It's very difficult to get the police involved, very difficult to get other services involved because resources are so tight. And these deaths should be preventable, because these women know these men are dangerous, their families know these men are dangerous, and yet they still are able to go on to kill. Sebastian, shocking statistics. It is, and we see this on the front of the Times as well, which statistics are really bad here, that rail attacks on women are up over 50%, and it's as Jess Phillips, the minister in charge of safeguarding, says, it's completely unacceptable. And at the weekend, I was at the Baltic Art Gallery in Gateshead, and there was an exhibition there by the Scottish photographer Frankie Spalletti, who died many years ago, and she started the zero tolerance against violence against women in Scotland in the 1990s. And it is amazing when I think back to the exhibition and the photos that happened 30 years ago, and you see these stories today. In some ways, some things have improved, but nowhere near enough. And I think that there is both a practical thing, but also a societal thing. The fact that these rail attacks are increasing and the reports of harassment double, it's just awful. It's absolutely awful. And hopefully it's not just about changing the laws and making sure the police have powers and whatever. It's about a society, it's about a cultural change that also needs to happen as well. Good that there being lights being shone on them in the newspapers, so people can read the stats for themselves. Truly shocking. Sonia and Sebastian, thank you very much for the moment. Coming up, university bosses are encouraging students to choose degrees they'll enjoy rather than their earning potential. But is that the right advice? We'll discuss that next. Do stay with us.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. We take you to the heart of the story that shapes our world.
independent United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been through in my life.
People turn up here with their child stuff in a black sack and just say, don't want to.
And that is what it is. It's first-class poverty.
Is this an example of the welfare state failing?
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
These are stories that affect us all. Millions of children are now having to catch up. Some stories have changed all of our lives. Because like the residents, the staff are being infected. Politicians, they make decisions all of the time, and it's our job to hold them to account. I wonder if you will take this opportunity to apologise to those families. But in the end, the real power doesn't actually lie with the politicians. The real power lies with the people. I'm Nick Martin. I'm the People and Politics correspondent at Sky News.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Sebastian Payne and Sonia Soda. Let's take a look at this story in the Telegraph, Sonia. And this is advice from universities to potential students that they should choose subjects based on passion rather than their prospects in the workplace.
Yeah, so this is from the chief executives of UCAS and Universities UK, and they've written a joint column that basically their advice to young people is pick a subject you really love. Don't necessarily think about the vocational value of a degree or which degree is going to pay the most. And in some ways, you know, that's a really nice sentiment, and there are loads of transferable skills you can get in theory from a degree, and you might do a degree, say, in English or maths, and then end up doing something completely different from your degree. However, they are not the people who are taking, you know, the typical graduate will now repay 42, 43k of, you know, over their working lives of their degree. And young people are quite right to be quite exacting about asking, well, if I'm going to be repaying that much, that's a huge amount, you know, they'll be repaying it, will mean they'll be able to get a mortgage later. It's very difficult to get on the housing ladder. It's like an extra income tax, effectively, that they're paying, an extra 9 percentage point income tax above the threshold for, you know, a lot of them will be paying it the bulk or all of their working lives. They are right to ask, what is this degree adding? Is it really worth it? Now, on one level, there are so many jobs that you didn't need a degree for 30 years that you do today. So you're trapped in the system where you have to get it. But I think one of the issues is that there will be very different experiences at university, and it won't always be the university as you think. Some courses will be fantastic and will really add value in terms of the skills you acquire. Transferable skills sometimes when you get to the workplace. Some will be very poorly provided, just like we have some great schools and some poor schools, some great hospitals and poor hospitals in this country. But the problem is with universities, you've got absolutely no idea which courses are great in terms of the skills you get, because all you've got is earnings data, and the most selective universities pick the most able graduates and they go on to pay more. It doesn't mean that their courses are better. So I think there is a serious accountability issue in our university system where you've got these universities spending a lot of students' future earnings on their behalf, and students don't really know what the quality of the experience is going to be.
So on the one hand, I'm reminded of Bill Bryson, who was the Chancellor of Durham University, where I went, who said, don't let university get in the way of your education, which was his kind of idea that there's much more to it than the actual degree you study, of the experience and the friends and the culture and whatever you gain from it. On the other hand, once again, Sonia is completely right on this. The students are burdening themselves with huge amounts of money and debt for a long period into their working careers based on these degrees. And dare I say, it's quite a privileged position if you're the head of UCAS to say you should think about what's important. Well, for a lot of people, what's important is what job you're going to get, what prospects you're going to get, and allow you to have a prosperous career and life off the back of it. So, and look, there is this wider question about our university sector in terms of, does it work? Do the fee structure work? Do the incentives work at the moment? And I think you're right about data and transparency on this, because for most people, the most transparency you get is a career guidance counsellor at school saying, have you thought about doing X at university? And then you go off to an open day and then that's it. There's very little data in terms of what earnings you'll get, what job prospects are, what the labour market looks like. So I think if you were able to take that in, along with this nice sentiment about having a great time and doing something that stirs your passions, then that's great. But at the moment, it was a little bit one-sided to me.
I suppose it's a slightly romantic view, but I still
Which you
would
don't
like
want to
think...
lose. To go back to that Bill Bryson thing, you want a bit of that, but you've got a bit of realism as well.
That people studied subjects that they were interested in and they did have a passion for.
And there is definitely something to be said for that. But I think what students want to know and be reassured is they're going to get a really quality experience, where even if they're studying something that isn't directly relevant to later in life, they're going to be learning important skills while they're at university. And we don't know, but I expect there will be a very differing quality of experience across different courses, different institutions, whereas universities just tend to pretend that it's all brilliant and excellent and young people should sign up as quickly as they can.
As soon as you hear the phrase transferable skills, you should start to panic, because that means you're learning a lot of generalities and nothing specific.
A warning there for all those getting their A-level results. It's Thursday next week? Next week, Thursday, I think. We've got time for the Telegraph and this customisable forecast for your back garden. This sounds amazing.
Yeah, based on AI, they think they're going to be able to give us a much more precise weather forecast, precise in inverted commas. So, you know, how hot will your garden could be compared to a garden like, you know, five houses down? The thing about it is that weather forecasts aren't always that accurate anyway. True. And sometimes I just think we'd be better off getting told, is it extremely hot, very hot, hot, quite warm, and then, you know, you just get a sense for it. So, you know, it's nice that they think they could do this through AI. I'm not sure of the utility of it. What do you think, Sam?
I mean, there was an app a couple of years ago called Dark Sky that had this kind of revolutionary, on-the-moment, accurate weather forecast. It got bought by Apple and has now been subsumed into whatever the Apple weather app is. And I thought that was really quite accurate. It seemed to tell you, like, rain is coming in 10 minutes, and that seemed pretty relatively really good.
So that's the app I
and this is what you want. This is maybe a bit too much. That's my answer.
Thank you both. Coming up next on Sky News at 11.